thank you for joining us today.
May you never be on my show.
So, you've been covering the US presidential elections for
Yes.
ITV's Good Morning Britain for a few months now. And I guess as of yesterday, we have our two candidates.
Yes.
One being sued on several fronts, making, let's say, dubious comments about many different kinds of people.
Right.
The other being investigated by the FBI. So how do you think it is that American politics has arrived at this situation where we've got those two choices, really?
Well, let me first say it's unfair to put them both in the same category or even the same sentence. I think it's fair to say, even if you didn't like her politics, you disagreed with her on issues, it's hard to find a time other than at the time of the founding fathers that we've ever had a candidate as prepared to be a president of the United States, as knowledgeable on issues, who hasn't already been president as Hillary Clinton. And on the other hand, you have someone who was a popular TV personality, a host of The Apprentice, which was a popular show, and he owns hotels. But in fairness, even if he didn't say some horrible things, absolutely no preparation to be leader of the free world, to be president of the United States. The example I give is if you were bringing, let's say you had a kid and you bring your kid's all of a sudden very sick and you run to the hospital, there has to be surgery, and you meet the person who's performing the surgery, you would want to know that the person performing surgery on your loved one would have at least gone to medical school. And, so with Donald Trump, nothing personally against him, but it's almost, it's disrespectful to the United States of America to think that you can be president of the United States when you've never done anything like that in your whole life. You have absolutely no training. You don't know anything about world affairs. You've never met these people. You don't know anything about diplomacy. So that's the first thing. And to compare that, the difference in that, with which email service she used, I mean, it's just not a serious, and just to say they're looking into the issue, someone's being investigated, she hasn't been charged with anything. That's a political thing at this point. So to compare them in the same sentence really is unfair, even if you're a diehard conservative Republican. There are some very good, very bright Republicans that could run for president and ought to have run, and then we can have a serious debate about the issues. But here we're talking about someone, even if he's the nicest person in the world, I have nothing personally against him. I don't like what he says on race issues, but I have nothing personally against him. But, there are people in my own family who I love, but they shouldn't be president of the United States. So, that's why let's get a focus here on what's really important. You're talking about the safety of the world, and you can't have this man who may in any other way be a wonderful person. What do we know? But you can't have his finger on the nuclear button. This is life and death. What are we, nuts?
But, I mean, you said that it's not fair to compare or even discuss Hillary in the same sentence as him. And right. I guess I would be inclined to agree with you. But she does seem to have become quite a surprisingly divisive figure, because you hear lots of this Bernie or bust, people saying they'd rather vote Trump than Clinton.
In the heat of a primary season, when you're running against each other, that's what... You're not old enough to remember. I remember 1968. America was being ripped apart. I mean, really ripped apart. The cities were burning. There were riots. There was the assassination of Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy. There were the riots at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. As I said, cities were burning. People were burning their draft cards. Thousands of people were coming back every month from Vietnam in body bags. I mean, good Lord, the country was being ripped. And in the Democratic primaries, we had Bobby Kennedy and Gene McCarthy running against the Democratic president in our own party, Lyndon Johnson. But we were very upset that with Lyndon Johnson's policies on Vietnam. So within the Democratic Party, there was a revolt. And then Bobby gets assassinated. We go to the Democratic Convention. Johnson withdraws, but his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, is the candidate. We as young people, we were, pissed off about what the administration was doing in the Vietnam War. We were unhappy that Humphrey got the nomination. And obviously it couldn't be Bobby anymore, but not McCarthy either. And we were upset about that, so many stayed home. And because we stayed home, we got Richard Nixon in the general election. So the question, and I think people will come home. This is just one day after the California primary. Eventually, the people that have been supporting Bernie Sanders, who is a wonderful person, has wonderful ideas on many issues. On a major issue, I'm closer to him than I am to Hillary on the issues. But he didn't win. And what are we going to do? Because we're ticked off that our candidate didn't win, we're going to sit home and Donald Trump will become president of the United States? I mean, that's the real world choice, ultimately. So they don't have to endorse today. Right after a heated battle in the primaries, which was, by the way, pretty tame compared to the Republican battles in their primaries. So give it a few weeks, couple of months. By the time the fall comes around and the campaign, most of those people will, on their own, not because they're forced to, but say, wow, I love my country. Hillary is closer to what I believe the country ought to be than what Donald's talking about. And I think that's where it'll end up. So, again, it's not a divisive figure. The Clintons have been, she's been in the public eye for our whole life, your whole lifetime. So, of course, there are going to be people that are opposed. But, again, if you don't like her politics, is there any part of you that really believes that she's not qualified, not capable, that she would ever vote against early childhood education, that she would ever fight against people having health care, that she would ever be bad on race relations? I mean, on things that are really important. What do people complain about her? They complain, I don't like her voice. She's not as charismatic as Bill. She shouldn't have forgiven Bill. I mean, all this stuff. You're blaming Hillary? This is not a game show. This is important stuff. And you have to have the most qualified person who shares your basic values to be the president of the United States. That's what I would argue.
But do you not think a lot of Trump's sort of really shocking success has been down to a feeling of disengagement with the establishment, which I suppose Hillary represents to a very large extent?
Sure. The first human reaction always, when things are going bad, first you're worried and then you're angry. And you don't want long explanations. You're just angry. You're angry at forces that are beyond your personal control. Throughout history, and it's cyclical, when times get tough, invariably there'll be someone trying to rise to power and take advantage of the fact that times are tough. And the problems aren't solvable right away, obviously, because they're difficult problems. If there was an easy answer to fixing the economy for everybody and having full equality, then we'd have it. So they're difficult answers. Well, meanwhile, people are hurting and they're getting angry. So invariably, someone will rise to power taking the position that you're angry, I'm on your side, and it's the fault of that minority. And it's always a minority, because if you're looking for a scapegoat, you're never going to pick the majority because they're the majority. You can't get to power that way. So you have to find a minority. And throughout history, the leaders that try to rise to power in tough times always find a minority, whether it's a cultural minority, a racial minority, a religious minority, or nationality. And it's their fault. And that's the next step. Blame the minority. And that's exactly, for example, what's going on in America today. Damn Mexicans. Oh, the Muslims. You know, those African Americans, you know. Blame the minority. Now, the danger is in time, and Trump isn't anywhere near that yet, so let's not go overboard. We may say Trump shouldn't be president, but he's not. I don't even want to mention the names of the people in history because that trivializes how bad they were. But what can happen in history, or has happened in history and can happen in the future, is that after you start going after this minority group, all of a sudden, because they obviously aren't the reason you have a problem, nothing's happening. So now the leader has to find something else. So you take it to the next step and you become militaristic, or you start creating a police state. You start arresting these people. Let's take them away, deport them from the country, set up camps, whatever you do. Or let's go to war with our neighbors. It's their fault. That is what the danger is if you don't stop it at the very beginning. And that is what happened. We are becoming tribal. You see it in the Middle East. You saw it with the fall of communism. When times were tough and the dictators fell, all of a sudden, everyone went to their tribes. And now it didn't matter what country you were part of, you were just part of your religious group or your ethnic group. And that is what is happening. It's happening, as I said, in the Middle East. It's happening in Europe now. And it will happen in America. If we replace the symbol of America, if we do away with the Statue of Liberty and replace it with a wall, we have destroyed the idea America, and America is, after all, an idea. It's the only country in the history of the world that was ever created by an idea. So if you destroy the idea, you ultimately destroy the country, and then we will be nothing but a land filled with tribes of Hispanic people, African Americans, Asians, Jews, pick your group. And that's what will happen, because America is nothing but other than all these various ethnic and racial groups. And if you start to do away with the idea America, then all you have left are the tribes. And that's when it's dangerous and the world starts falling apart.
But don't you think that sort of fragmenting of American society has already sort of begun? I mean, the fact that Trump can say these ridiculous things, these really offensive, racist things, even people, high officials in the Republican Party itself, or, after he made those comments about the judge, came out and said that was racism, but I'm still supporting Trump.
Give it time. I'll come back in December and you'll make fun of me if I'm totally wrong. But I can't believe, and it's not that I haven't been wrong in life, America is not going to vote for Donald Trump. He's been winning in Republican primaries. The first response of politicians often is to save their own skin. So right now, the leadership of the Republican Party is saying, oh, we got to get elected. We got to get the Congress elected, et cetera. And if we have a divided party, we're not going to be able to win in November. So they're dealing with that issue. But at some point, the weight of the moral argument and of national security, I believe, will finally push even the leadership. Today, it's not a person that you would know, but there's a radio commentator, and he's now even on cable television, who's very popular and very influential in right-wing conservative causes. Today, he came out and called for the Republican Party to take away the nomination from Donald Trump, to literally change the rules. Now, that's starting, if you got this kind of revolt going on, and, you got a Republican convention with two former Republican presidents, and the last Republican nominee for the presidency have already said they're not coming to the convention. I mean, what does that tell you? So let's not conclude at this moment that Trump is the next president. It's, people aren't focused in right now. Right now it's still a game show. Right now it's people are laughing. But I said to the group that I was talking to just before upstairs, It's like when you were a kid in grade school and there was a kid in the back of the room, you're in the 4th grade, all of a sudden yelling out things you're not supposed to, and you all giggle and laugh because this is really funny. You don't really believe it's the right thing to do, but you're cheering him on secretly because he's giving trouble to the teacher. You know, that's what's going on with Trump. Trump is saying things that people know you should not say and even know you shouldn't believe, but they can't believe someone's saying it. It's like the crass humor people sometimes have when they're out drinking or when they're with their buddies. They know that's not right. It's not what they truly believe, but it's just something you say as a crude joke. You know, and finally your wife will turn to you and say, will you stop that? You know, and that's Trump. You know, he says these things. They are horrible things to say, and it's very hurtful to the people that he's saying it about. And it's very un-American, and I think he'll pay a price for that. That's why I don't think he's going to be president. He'll pay a price for that as much as anything else. Hispanics aren't voting in Republican primaries. African Americans aren't voting in Republican primaries. You know, when the general election comes, all these people vote. What big state is he going to win? Where does he think the minorities live? New York, California, Florida, Ohio. Can't win these states.
Well, do you think maybe then that the 2-party system is broken, or that is something that needs to change?
Well, it's not really broken. The world is adjusting, not just American politics, to you're stronger than I am. Can you open this? Social media. Oh, fine. Show off. I did the hard part.
Of course. It was a joint effort.
Thank you. Social technology and then the social media has changed politics. And so it's causing all institutions, whether it's great universities or political parties or governments, it's causing all institutions, the church, to have to adapt. Barack Obama never would have been president of the United States if we didn't have cell phones. And what I mean by that is it used to be that the political party, the leadership of the party would determine who the candidates were, period. And they would select, figure out who the delegates will be, and the party endorsed, and that was it. Well then, and they raised the money. You couldn't run if you didn't have that money. But now come cell phones. So Barack Obama, he never would have been selected by the party to be the presidential candidate in 2008 because the party leadership thought the conventional wisdom was America's not ready yet to have an African American as president. They wouldn't have chosen him. Not because they're evil. They just would have thought, it's politically, we're not going to win the South. We're not going to win the Midwest. We better not, that kind of thing. So Barack Obama goes out through cell phones and builds his own incredible organization, raises all the money through social media, way more money than the party could raise. And all of a sudden, you didn't need a political party to get reelected, to get elected. And that's changed now. And so now all of a sudden, well, if the political party isn't the way you raise money for campaigns, and there's some Supreme Court decisions, what are we going to do now? So that's what the parties are dealing with. How do they establish any control? Because everyone's organizing on their own now. Through the social media, you can set up your own precinct workers, your own, own method of organizing, getting out the vote on election day, and raising money. And people do it. And those of you, well, it's different here in England because you don't have all that political advertising as much as we do in America. So I can tell you on my phone, 30 times a day, at least, maybe it's 50, I'm getting some request for financial contribution from some, 20 from Bernie, 20 from Hillary, Democratic Congressional Committee, all organizations, all liberal organizations, and everybody's doing that. Hit this for $5 contribution, hit this for $10. So it just keeps, and they're raising tons of money. And that's why you have $100 million being spent on a campaign. Hundreds of million, not 100.
So you've been a Democrat your whole life, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've put all your support behind Hillary. So do you think, given the news from yesterday, that Hillary will effectively, definitely be the nominee, that Sanders is doing a disservice to the Democrat Party by refusing to back out now? Because he has said he's going to keep it going until the Democratic National.
You're being inhuman, I think, if you say, you're not saying, not you personally. One is being inhuman if you're suggesting that the next day Bernie should stand up and says, I'm out of it. He's devoted, in terms of his political views, he's devoted his whole life to this. And he certainly ran an incredible campaign coming out of nowhere. He's an independent socialist. And he caucuses with the Democratic Party, but he hasn't been part of the party machine. He's one of two, I think, independent senators in the United States Senate. And so you can't expect, and then all of a sudden the campaign catches fire. He gets these rallies, 20,000 young people, they're going wild. You can't just turn that off overnight. First of all, his supporters would be upset. So you give it space, you give it room. Anyone if you've all been involved in political campaigns, you get that fighting spirit. It's election night. The night you lose, that sucks. That's just a horrible feeling. You've devoted everything, for the past year or two into this thing, and now, gee, what do we do tomorrow? I don't know. We got to take down the signs, and and you're certainly not in a loving feeling for the person who beat you. So you give it time. President Obama is going to meet with Sanders on Thursday, and they'll have a discussion, and they'll probably talk about, and Sanders will be an influence for the platform. Some of his issues will become part of the Democratic platform, and he's going to be a force, and he'll have a great speaking role at the convention, at least be offered it. My guess is he'll accept it. So, but you have to be sensitive. You don't come barreling in. Okay, I want an endorsement right now. Whoa, easy. You go through grieving first. And so it'll happen. He's not a mean-spirited guy. He believes in his philosophy. And based on his philosophy, you can't find a rational explanation why he wouldn't, in the end, support Hillary over Trump. And he said so. Even in the debates, he said, look, Hillary on her worst day is better than Trump. I think that's a direct quote. So, it'll happen. But I don't think there should be any pressure on him right now. Just,
Did you think, democratic socialism ever stood a chance in America?
Well, every economic system in the world, possible exception of North Korea, but I confess that I don't know everything. Well, I don't know anything about what's exactly going on in North Korea. But virtually every economic system in the world is some combination of capitalism and socialism. And where if it's a continuum, in some societies it's way over towards almost total socialism. And in some societies, it's almost totally capitalism. But, so in America, we say we're capitalist society. Yeah, well, Medicare is socialism. So, it's a combination. And the label almost is we have to have both. We have to have both. Communism obviously does not work. It's been tried. It doesn't work because it runs counter to the instincts people have to be somewhat ambitious and to make the best life for yourself that you can. That's why I said to the group before, you're all at this great institution, probably the most prominent one on the planet Earth. And you're here because first you were given a gift of a great brain, but also you want to have a good life, and you want to graduate and be able to pursue what you want to pursue. You're ambitious. And, that's basically people will work hard, try to invent things, create things, build a business, or do something in education, whatever it is, but you will try, your life will be more satisfying to you if you can achieve your goals. And that's kind of what capitalism, we try to put that into an economic system and said, if people want to improve their lives, they will work really hard at doing something, producing something, and that will create great inventions for the whole society, great services for the whole society. So the concept works, but there are problems, and the problems is that if you don't control it, you can have great inequality. So that's what the balance is. Every society, whether it's China or United States, England, every society is trying to grapple with what is the exact balance between what services you have in your society that will be more towards socialism. America's dealing with that right now with healthcare. And what items in your society, as China and Cuba are now opening up some areas because they need some capitalism in order to make their economy work. And that's where I think we are. So is there some democratic socialism in America? Of course. There have been a lot of services. It became, ever since the Cold War, you can't say socialism, although that's changing now. But that's just because of the name. But we were living with socialism. If you talk about taking people's social security away, they'll go crazy. It's political death. And then the next speech they're saying, but we can't have socialism here. What do you think social security is? What do you think Medicare is? So it's just labels.
So as the first woman to lead a major political party's bid for the presidency, Hillary's, I suppose, maybe I shouldn't call it a victory yet, but her position now is, I suppose, quite a momentous occasion in America's history. You could almost compare it to when Obama first got chosen as nominee and then won. Yeah. But even still, it seems like maybe not so much of it, but some of the criticism levied at her, and I think you kind of touched on this earlier, seems to sort of be perhaps a little bit sexist in nature. Do you think America is ready for a female president now?
Absolutely, yeah. Now, are there some people? No, there's still a lot of chauvinists around, but it's a very important barrier to break, because I would argue that you start out virtually with a woman in everybody's home. When you're a baby, the very first role model you see is your mother. And you find out there's certain things that mom does. So our first inkling to any kind of prejudice, any kind of an assumption of somebody doing something simply because of what they are, is what we learn about our mothers. I would argue that may be the most inherent prejudice we have, because until we're educated the other way, we could be left to believe that what you are in life is based on what you are when you were born. And what we try to teach our kids, our grandson, whatever, if there's one lesson in life, it is this: never, ever, ever judge a human being based on what they are. You only judge human beings based on what they do. If you remember that line, you will never be prejudiced in your life. So I think which is why it's taken so long in America to break this glass ceiling. To this day, even though everyone gives the appropriate language, well, yeah, women are equal, we're still not paying equally. We still treat women bosses different than we treat. Look at the criticism. Whenever did someone complain about a presidential candidate, a male, because his voice was too high? I mean, just the stuff. You see Hillary's hair? Why is she wearing those pantsuits? I mean, just the stuff you say in a normal conversation. You're not even thinking that, whoa. If Hillary gets angry, when do you think there's any male politician that didn't once or didn't use a different email system? I mean, the stuff that we just want to pick pick on her. And with anything that happened with Bill, why is Hillary to blame? What, you're blaming her because she stayed with him? There is that, and that's why it was kind of emotional last night when she gave that speech. You look out in the crowd; it's all these women there with their daughters. You know, we can't get it, but imagine what it must mean to a young girl now. All of a sudden, in America, what can't I be? What can I be? That's a major, and it was the same thing when Barack Obama got elected. The emotion people felt. It's a significant moment. And so it's not trivial, and it will have an effect in the election. I'm telling you, the week before the election, the day of election, there are going to be a lot of mothers that are taking their daughters to the poll. I want you to be there when I, cast this vote. So I think it's very historic, and it's good. It's not just, isn't this a cute moment? It's not cute. It's substantive. We have to get over this image of what someone should be just because of their gender or just because of their color of their skin or who their parents were. It's insane. It's killing the world.
Mm. Well, all of the discussion, in a general sense, and tonight has been about the presidential elections. But do you think people have not been paying enough attention to the congressional side of things? Because we've seen with Obama, when you've got a president without support from Congress, it's quite difficult to kind of really do anything.
It's tougher now to change Congress, and it's a structural reason, and I'll try to make it simple to understand. It's not simple to understand, but it's how the system works. Under the American Constitution, every 10 years, we have to take a census. Based on that census, every state, the 50 states, have to then, the state legislature, with the approval of the governor, they then draw the congressional lines. Now, here's how it's done. You have MPs in constituencies. We call them congressional districts. Each congressional district is about 635,000 people. That's the average. So you look at the state population, and then you figure out how many times the 635,000 go into that whole population. That's how many congressional districts you have. Now let's draw the lines. And then, in addition to that, every state gets 2 senators. Doesn't matter if you're a big state, a little state, every state gets 2 senators. By the way, the reason it's different with the House and the Senate is that's how the Constitution got ratified. You needed 9 of the 13 original colonies to ratify the Constitution. The small states didn't want a government that was represented by population, because then they'd said New York and Virginia would have all the power. The big states said, well, wait a second, we don't want a government where every state gets the same amount of representatives. That's not fair. Most of the population lives in New York and Virginia. So they compromised. We'll have a House of Representatives which will be based purely on population. So therefore, a big state like New York or California will have more congressmen, congresswomen, than the small states, because it's based on population. But every state will have 2 United States senators. So that's where the equality is. So we have the House, and then we have the Senate. Now, the congressional lines, which goes to your question, I told you, are then drawn every 10 years by the party in power at the state legislature. They're politicians. So they draw the line so that their party is more likely to be elected. So I'll give you an example. They drew the lines where African Americans tend to live in big cities. So they drew the lines so that they put all the African Americans in one district. So absolutely, that district will always vote for the Democrat. And you will have an African American in Congress, because it's 95% African American. But now that leaves all the other congressional districts with a very few, I'm giving an example just of African Americans because that's the most loyal Democratic vote, etc. So you pile all the Democrats into one district, and then you have the Republicans to be the majority in all the rest of the districts. So that's why we have a Congress that is overwhelmingly Republican, because they've piled all the Democrats together in the big cities. And yet, in the presidential elections, in 5 of the last 6 presidential elections, more people have voted for the Democratic candidate for president than the Republican. More people in America are Democrats than Republicans. It's just that the way the congressional districts have been drawn, the Congress winds up to have more Democratic congressmen. That's why we have this system. So until 2020, there's no hope of changing the lines. So whoever is president is going to have to be working after this November with that same right-wing Republican Congress, which is the strongest argument for having a Democratic president. Because with this right-wing Congress, if you don't have the only thing that stops the right-wing Congress from passing all these laws that are really regressive is the fact that there's a Democratic president that can veto it. But if you had a Republican president, none of their laws would get vetoed. No Republican president, even a, quote, responsible one, would dare veto a Republican Congress, because then he would be challenged in the next presidential election in the primaries. And no one has been elected president, re-elected president, who has been challenged in his own party in the primaries. No one. And, you can go to President Ford in '76 was challenged by Reagan. Ford won the nomination against Reagan, but then he lost to Jimmy Carter. In 1980, Jimmy Carter was challenged in the Democratic primaries by Ted Kennedy. He beat back Ted Kennedy, but then he lost to Ronald Reagan. In 1992, the first President Bush was challenged in the primaries by Pat Buchanan. He beat back Buchanan, but then he lost to Clinton. So if you're challenged in your own party, it's over. And that's why a Republican president would never veto a Republican Congress. That's the danger there. And so I don't have much hope that the Congress is going to change, at least for the next, until 2020, the next 4 years. One other thing. The reason Congress doesn't work together is a result of those lines. And here's why. The districts have been drawn over the years that 95% of the American people live in a district that is either overwhelmingly Republican or overwhelmingly Democrat. So therefore, if you win the primaries, you automatically get reelected because you're in an overwhelmingly Republican or overwhelmingly Democrat district. So every politician is only worried, not about beating the other party. They're in a safe district. They're only worried about losing in the primary to someone who's more right-wing than they are. On the Democratic side, more left-wing than they are. So Republicans and Democrats don't talk to each other anymore. If you're a Republican candidate and they see a picture of you with President Obama, you will lose the primary, the next Republican primary. That's actually happened. The Republican candidate who was running against the incumbent in the primary, in his television ads, showed pictures of the guy with President Obama, and that cost him the primary. So we have extremes in the Congress right now. Everyone is going to their corner, only talking to their base. But in a presidential election, none of that matters. And that's why I'm saying in the end, Hillary Clinton wins, because you're not going to have everyone going to the edges. You have the mass of American people voting their way, and it doesn't matter what district you live in. You're still either voting for Trump or Clinton, and more will end up voting for Hillary.
But it seems like in the American system of government, you've got so many of these really complicated structures, the 2-year rotation, preventing like long-term policy. Why isn't there like a shake-up of the system? It seems like in America, the institutions that you have are so hallowed. People go on about amendments. Why do you think there will ever be a chance of someone being like, this needs to be reformed?
Well, the way the system's set up, the only people that can change the system are the politicians who are in office, and they're in office because you don't have reform. So they're not going to change the system that makes it easier for someone to beat them. That's the first problem. There is the possibility of going through amendments, but over 230 years or whatever, we have, very few amendments, 27 amendments. That's it. So it's very hard to get, because in order to get an amendment, you got to get 3/4 of the state legislatures to support it. So it's a very hard process. There almost has to be an issue where everyone is in agreement on. So it is difficult to change the system. It's what I said before. If any of these problems were easy to solve, they would be solved. But, so we have a system where, but eventually there will be not a violent revolution, but the kind of revolution that Bernie Sanders is talking about, that a new generation of young people will come around. I do this podcast. Here's my plug. You go to jerryspringer.com and then hit podcasts. And every week I do a weekly podcast. And it's a combination of 10 minutes of comedy, 10 minutes of a political rant, and 10 minutes of music. And the music is folk music and bluegrass music. And it's done at a coffee shop in Ludlow, Kentucky, before a live audience. And people come in with their guitars, their banjos, their fiddles. Anyway. Every time I start saying that, then I forget what I was talking about. What was your question?
Shake-up.
Oh, the shake-up. Okay. So, oh my gosh, I forgot. So the shake-up will come when a new generation suddenly will decide that they're just going to change things. Oh, yes. The name of the company I started to do the podcast is called Liberals Always Win. That's incorporated. Liberals always win. And it's true. It doesn't mean we win every battle. It means the arc of history, undeniably, you may not think it's a good thing, but it's undeniable that in the free world, every 10 years, we are more liberal than we were 10 years before. Every generation of teenagers is telling their parents no. We are, whether it's civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, whatever the issue is, marijuana, every 10 years, certainly in America, we are far more liberal than our parents were. And that's inevitable because every generation wants to be freer. No one likes to be told what to do. You have your own interests. So in the end, liberals always win. We lose battles along the way. But, 10 years ago in America, if you couldn't even admit that you were gay. And now we have gay marriage. When I started doing my television show, 1991, and by the way, I apologize. Back in 1991, when I started doing the show, we did a show on interracial dating, and there were protesters outside the studio. And now, of course, we have a president who is the product of an interracial marriage. Liberals always win. Eventually, conservatives will fight it in the beginning. It's the end of society. It'll be horrible. They will fight. They will win some elections, some battles, but eventually they come around. Conservatives fought America on the civil rights movement. Conservatives fought America on working men's rights, working people's rights. They were against the 40-hour work week. They were against minimum wage. They were against Social Security. They were against Medicare. They were against women's rights. They were against, as I said, gay rights. They always fight it in the beginning, but in the end, remember this, liberals always win. Yay.
Okay, we're going to open questions up to the floor now. Somebody will be going around with a microphone. Please do speak directly into it loudly and clearly for our recording. So if somebody in the front row, the lady just here. Well, we'll come to you after. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Springer, for such a lovely talk. I have 3 questions, but I can ask only one. And allow me to ask, you choose. One question is political, another is tricky, and the final one is more on the personal lines. Which one would you pick?
Is this a game show? I pick what's behind the curtain on, I'll take the middle. What was it? Whatever question you want. Pick your 2.
2. Okay.
No, that was 1. That was, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you a question which basically has been at the top of the minds of many people in America, especially during the time of the primaries. You talked about that people have objections against Mrs. Clinton on trivial grounds. So if you were to choose, imagine a scenario that you have the competition is between Mr. Clinton and Mrs. Clinton. And if you were to choose which one, whom to vote, who would you vote for? Because I'm trying to ask you, how do you see the differentiation between the politics of Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Clinton?
Hardly any difference in terms of their political ideas. They met I think, when he was in law school, and they literally have been together for 50 years, 45 years, living politics. I mean, it is that's in their DNA. So I think, I'm sure there's some issue that they have some difference, but nothing substantive. So the truth is, no, they are on the same page. Their personalities are different. And Bill is clearly more charismatic. But again, that's based on in a sense, on a chauvinistic society that sees a guy, hey, that's kind of okay. And here's Hillary, who basically is your responsible older sister. But their views on the issues, and they're both brilliant. They're very, very bright people in the world of political issues. So either one, they're great.
So on what points do they differ? Do you know of any?
Not on, probably Hillary initially is more pushy on the health issue, on health care and early childhood education. She probably educated Bill on that. That's my guess, but it'd be a wonderful choice to make. You couldn't go wrong. Yeah.
Next question, the gentleman just behind.
So if you look back historically at the craziness of television in America, your show could probably be, one of those turning points. Like, that's on TV, and now when Donald Trump is running for election, you're saying, and that's on TV. So do you think that the ethos that your show created in America have paved the way for the Donald Trumps of the world to make their way onto television?
I am not the father. Well, the serious answer is no. Because obviously there's a difference between entertainment and real life political issues, war and peace. So it's hard to give up. I understand why you're asking the question, but there can't be a serious intellectual answer to that, because there's never, ever been somebody on my show who I thought should be president of the United States. So, now, and anything that you see on our show today, on any television show, compared to the social media and what you guys are putting on your Instagrams and on your iPhones, is tame. So what was shocking about our show is we had never seen it on television before. That's what was shocking. The behavior has not changed. There is nothing that's ever been on our show that isn't already in the Bible, that isn't already in Shakespeare, that isn't already in great literature, that isn't already in opera. Okay? So human behavior has always been there. It's that 2,000 years ago, people would congregate in the marketplace or the town square, and you would chat about what's going on in your neighborhood. Oh, did you hear what they did? Really? Yeah. Wait till I tell Dad. Whatever. The only thing that's changed in the 2,000 years is that our neighborhood is now the planet Earth because of technology and social media. So now we know more about the Kardashians than we do about the person who lives next door to us. That's all that's changed. The behavior hasn't changed. Television show didn't create dysfunction. We had a Holocaust before anybody had a television set. So the serious answer has to be, look, my show's crazy, stupid, whatever. But it can't be part of a serious discussion about who should be president of the United States. So that's what I'm saying. Clearly, our show is a reflection of what is going on in the world of the media today. That is true. Donald Trump was inevitable. And what I mean by that is 30 years from now, historians will look back and said, in America, we should have seen him coming. Now, and what I mean by that is this. For the last 40 years in America, probably start with Goldwater, but let's say Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan said government can't solve problems, government is the problem, we have raised in America 2 generations of people who have grown up to hate the government, to distrust any politician, to think everyone that runs for office is either corrupt, should be in prison, is a pervert, what have you. Every single political commercial you see in America is how the other guy is a bum. Well, if you raise 2 generations of Americans to believe that the government is horrible, that it's corrupt, you should disrespect the president, you do all these things, you raise a generation to believe that, we should have realized that at some point someone would run for president who is outside the government and hates the government. Now, in order to run for president, you have to be well known. Well, in America, the only fields you can be well known in, if it's not politics, is either sports or entertainment. Athletes are too young to run for president. So it was going to be someone out of the entertainment field. Did we know it'd be Trump? Of course not. But we should have seen coming that it was inevitable that at some point an entertainer would be run as anti-government, and he would be popular or she would be popular, and therefore that person could run for president. We should have seen it coming. He is inevitable. He is a product, particularly of the Republican Party. Because his policies, even though most of the Republicans don't use his words, the policies aren't that much different. My view of Trump is kind of like this. Okay, here's my example. Mom and Dad are having a dinner party. 15, 20 people over for dinner. The dinner's over. Everyone leaves. Mom and Dad are in the kitchen doing the dishes or whatever. And Mom says to Dad, boy, that's Sally. She's put on a lot of weight, don't you think? Unbeknownst to them, their 6-year-old child is outside the kitchen door, hears that. The next week, Sally comes over just for a visit. The 6-year-old goes up to Sally and says, Mom says you've gotten fat. Well, the parents are, oh my God, they're beside themselves, but they can't really punish the kid because the kid's telling the truth. The kid is saying what he heard the parents say. That's Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Donald Trump is saying out loud what they privately say at their country clubs and in their private home, in their homes, their parties. They're saying the same kind of thing. Oh, we can't have them in our neighborhood. No, they're not going to, we got to stop these Mexicans from coming over. But they don't say it out loud because it's not politically correct or appropriate or polite or moral. But Donald Trump heard him, and he's saying it. That's the embarrassment. That's what the Republican Party is dealing with now. They don't know what to do. That's why some of the leaders are saying, we got to take the nomination away from him. Or we got to have a challenge at the convention. Or let's just campaign for the congressional candidates and not for president. That's why the civil war is going on in the Republican Party. Because they can't absolutely refute him, because if they do, they're going to lose their base. Because the base is agreeing with what he says. That's the problem of Donald Trump. It's not the Democrats that are causing him trouble. It's his own party. He's embarrassing them because he's saying what many of them really believe.
Well, next question. Yep. Just there at the front.
So just staying on the subject of your chat show, over all the years, what would you say?
Isn't it great? Yeah.
Oh, it was fantastic. What would you say were your most memorable moments, whether it was something particularly good, bad, or just so outrageous where you thought to yourself, is this for real or mine, just some bizarre dream?
Well, the show is stupid. Look, we've had 5,000 shows so far because we do 200 shows a year, 25 years. So figure 5,000 shows. We have at least 10 guests a show. So you're talking, we've had 50,000 people on this show. That's a nation. So I can't pick out, one that is. I will tell you, it is thoroughly enjoyable to do. And we don't deal, just because all these shows get tossed in together, we don't deal with serious issues. Okay, we deal with dating. I'm not saying that people don't get angry, they do. But they're angry because their girlfriend's dating someone else or slept with someone else. And so their anger is real, but the next day they're dating someone else. It's not life-changing. We don't do pregnancy tests, by the way. I made the joke about I'm not the father. Those are the shows. So we don't do, because that's too life-changing. I don't want to do that. That's just me. So I don't mind doing a show where people can come on and air whatever grievance they had and go at it. That's their business. It's no censorship. They can say what they want. We'll bleep out the bad language, but they can say what they want. But I don't want to. Any problem that can be solved in a 1-hour television show is by definition not a serious problem. So, and I'm not trained. I'm a lawyer. I'm trained in the legal area. I'm not trained to be a counselor or. And we tell them, do not come on the show if you're looking for psychological or social or counseling help. That's not what we do. We're a show. We let you use a different name. We're not trying to out anybody. You get to choose the subject you talk about. There are no surprises that you haven't agreed to ahead of time. So the stage is yours. At the end, I'll give my final thought. But the stage is yours. So the honest answer is, it's a fun show to do. You and I gave the example to one person, I'll give it to you now. You and I go out to lunch one day, and I say, tell me your name again, I'm sorry. Brahma. I say, Brahma, what was your day like? You'll say, oh, boy, it was a tough day at the office, but, a funny thing happened at the water cooler. And you'll tell me a story, and we'll chuckle. Yeah, that was funny. And then you'll say, Jerry, what was your day like? And I'll say, I got this guy who married his horse.
Did that really happen?
Yes. Yes, it did. I always have the better story. Why wouldn't you want my job?
Next question.
Kind of stumped you, didn't I, huh?
There's someone right at the back on the outer row. I think when you've seen that, you've seen everything, really.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, I'm sure you know the target audience and demographics of your show. If your audience was to vote for a candidate in the upcoming presidential election, who do you think they'd vote for?
I think mostly for Hillary. A vast portion of the demographics are minorities, lower income. We have a large African-American audience, a large Hispanic audience. Yeah, I would say Hillary. I'm sure there's some Trump people, of course. But no, I'd say it's a Democratic audience. People that watch the show, they know I never talk politics on the show. But it's evident that I'm liberal. Otherwise, I'd be up there preaching in the middle of the show. And I believe as long as you're not hurting someone else, people should be able to live their lives. I don't approve of the behavior on the show, but I say that in my final thought. But I'm not going to condemn someone, because of their situation. The only difference between me and anyone on my show is I wear better suits. And I was lucky in life. I had better luck in the gene pool of parents. That's luck. Life is 99% luck. Let me say that again. Life is 99% luck. There's not one person in this audience that chose to be born. You had nothing to do with that decision. You had nothing to do with the decision to whom you'd be born, in what country, in what environment, in what era, with what kind of a brain, with what kind of health. You had nothing to do with any of that. It's all given to you. Now, you then work hard and all that, but lots of people work hard. The guy who's picking up the garbage outside, he's working hard. How come you have a better life than he does? It's luck. We really have to keep that in perspective. Life is a gift. It's a gift. Now, whether you have a religious doctrine or some other moral compass, whatever it is, when you're given the gift that we've been given, you say thank you. You give something, and the way we say thank you is to give something back. So you will give something back in society. I do it politically. But you will choose what is important. You may do it in charitable work in your community, whatever it is. You'll figure it out. But we should never say, I made it, why can't they? Because who are you kidding? You know very well when you're sitting alone in the room and it's just you and you're not trying to impress anybody, you're probably sitting there saying, holy shit, how did I get so lucky? So I think that's important to remember.
I think we've got time just for one or two more. The gentleman there in the white shirt in the middle.
First, thank you so much, Mr. Springer. So just now you mentioned how Donald Trump, his policy, he reflects a preference a lot of the current Republican voters. But similarly, Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, they all have pretty progressive Republican policies. But I think one reason why Trump was so popular is, like he said, he's very charismatic. He knows how to present himself. He's kind of a symbol of success. And every time he attacks someone, for example, he calling the lying Ted or crooked Hillary, he always attacked their personality, and that actually works. A lot of people think of them are quite untrustworthy, even without knowing any of their actual policy preferences. So what do you think the rising importance of personal charisma has an impact on election, and do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah.
Well, there's no question charisma works, and we're attracted to it. And sometimes it's the good guy that has charisma. I would argue Barack Obama had incredible charisma. In my lifetime, John Kennedy had incredible charisma. Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan. So you can have charisma doesn't determine whether you're good or bad in your policies. It's just a trait. And sometimes the good guys have the charisma, and we're happy with that. Sometimes the bad guys have charisma, and we're not happy with that. So... but is it effective? Of course it is. And Americans in general aren't that political. I say when I travel in Europe or to other countries, you can have criticisms of America, and obviously you can have criticisms, and some are very legitimate. But American people aren't trying to take over the world. American people don't even know where the rest of the world is. It's not like anyone is sitting around saying, boy, if we could just get control of France, or it just isn't. It's we're geographically isolated, and we're so big, you can get whatever you want someplace in America, whether it's climate, lifestyle, whatever. It is, in a sense, it thinks it can be a little world to itself. Now that causes problems. We're horrible with languages. You know, we don't travel as much as we should. We're not, so there are real negatives of that, but we're not a society that you need to be scared of that, boy, we want to control you. Although I do have an answer to Brexit. If you leave the European Union, I invite you to become America's 51st state. It's been 240 years since the revolution. Get over it. Let's join together. This will be perfect. Plus, if you're the 51st state, my guess is you probably wouldn't vote for Trump. So it's a 2-for-1. And here's the best part. I was born in England, but if you're part of America, I was born in America then. I can be president. What are you thinking? So, yeah, I think the charisma is working for Trump. But it's got to be more than that. It won't last. Because in the end, particularly when it comes to president, people will pay attention at the end. They treat that vote it's why so many more people vote in a presidential election than vote in congressional or otherwise. So it's, you know, the one day every 4 years that we feel very patriotic. It's time to pay attention, take time in the day, or you don't even have to do it anymore. Now you can do it by mail. But so I think people will start to focus in. And I think in the end, what will get people, number one, demographically, the country is Democrat. But beyond that, I think people will worry about his temperament and having his finger on the button. And I think that'll be the issue, that charisma aside, they'll say, wow, you know, I don't mind him being the host of Apprentice. He was damn good at it. But not President of the United States. And I think that's a fair assumption to make.
I think we've only got time for one last question. The lady just behind you, the blue top.
Would you consider running for political office again? And if so, what office would you prefer to?
I am today announcing my candidacy for the No, I'm 72, so, you know, the train's passed. And I'm very active politically, as I guess you can assume, but in America, I'm spending at least one day a week giving political speeches, raising money, organizing, whatever, campaigning. So I'm very active. But I don't need to run for office. I'm not looking for a job. There are a lot of people younger, brighter, whatever, that, you know, it's not. In fact, I left England. I was born here, and I left when I was 5. I left England when I found out I couldn't be king. And now I get to America, I find out I can't be president. That's why you got to become our 51st state. Come on. Give me a little room here. But the serious answer to your question is no. It's, you know, if I were younger in these times, I probably would have said, I got to do this because we need more liberal voices. But I think, frankly, they're out there now. You know, I'm not needed for that. Other people could be the candidate.
Well, I mean, Kanye West thrown his hat in for 2020. I think we'd all rather have you.
Oh, Kanye, right. All right, I'll run. Let me just say a word about Brexit. Okay, I won't. An observation from someone across the pond. I'm not here at all to tell you which way to vote. But here's an observation, because I've really watched the last 2 or 3 days, watching both sides debate on all these news programs and reading in the paper and everything. And it strikes me there is one universal truth in politics. And the universal truth is the law of unintended consequences. And what I mean by that is there is no one on the planet Earth that knows for sure what will happen if you leave the European Union. Everyone can have an opinion, and some of those opinions are going to be right. I'm not saying which side is going to be right. I am saying God's truth is nobody knows. And the law of unintended consequences as it relates to this is there are thousands and thousands of decisions that are going to be made once you leave by all the other countries, by all the other investors, by all the other industrialists, by all the other citizens who make decisions about travel. All these other entities will make their own decisions based on their own self-interest, just as you're making yours now. So all I'm saying is, when you vote, if you're voting to leave the Union, it may turn out to be wonderful, but you don't know what the consequences are. And it could turn out to be horrendous. We just don't know. So the decision I think every citizen has to make is, are the stakes big enough that I'm willing to take this risk? Are there other ways to change what is now bothering me about being part of the Union? And you may decide it is so bad now, come what may, I'll handle whatever happens, we'll deal with it. Or you'll say, it's too big a risk. We'll figure out another way for the time being to deal with the problems that suddenly irk us. It's the law of unintended consequences. It happens every time we go to war. Look at the unintended consequences of going to war in Iraq, going to war in Afghanistan, toppling Saddam Hussein, toppling Gaddafi. Everything we do has a consequence that we didn't figure out at the time because we didn't know what the response would be. That's all I'm saying. You got to think about when you vote. Vote. It's your decision. But I have no idea, and I don't think there's a person, everyone I've listened to, all your great leaders, they have a strong opinion, but they don't know. They just have an opinion what they think might happen. Thanks for having me.